You are listening to the Examine Life with Bram Levinson. So I want you to just listen to the sounds around me right now. I'm pretty sure that the microphone is picking all of this up, but just listen. It is the 6th day of our yoga and meditation vacation here in Greece, and overnight the wind has picked up and gotten almost biblical. 80-kilometer-an-hour winds, and for someone like me who feels constantly in the presence of the gods and the goddesses, the Greek gods and goddesses, when I'm here in Greece, this is just even more spiritual than what I'm used to. The wind gods here are referred to, I believe the English pronunciation is the anemoi or the anemi, and I feel like the gods are very present right now, whipping around. We had our yoga practice today, and really the wind just howling around us, and then we went down to the beach for the meditation, and the beach was a little protected from the wind. It was a little cove, so it was a little calmer, but the water was churning. And I found myself talking about something today to the students that I felt was important enough to sit down and sort of convey to you through this medium. There is a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, and I've referred to the Bhagavad Gita before, but the Bhagavad Gita in Hinduism is an epic, and it is essentially the story of a boy who's going to war, who does not want to fight. And he's in a chariot with God, and he is asking God to illuminate all the reasons why he should go to this battle. And I'm not going to get too deeply into it, but there are so many quotable quotes and quotable verses, shlokas from the Bhagavad Gita, and the one I want to talk about today I've also referred to in a past podcast, but I really want to elaborate on it because I think it's one of the most important teachings that we can be exposed to. And, listen, the Bhagavad Gita was written apparently thousands of years ago, and yet these teachings have never, I think, been more necessary and relevant than they are to today's times and this climate politically and socially and economically that we find ourselves in. Chapter 18, verse 47 of the Bhagavad Gita says, "It is better to live a fraction of your own Dharma, even imperfectly, than to try and imitate someone else's Dharma." And later on in the Bhagavad Gita, we are also told that it is even better to die in one's Dharma than to die in the Dharma of another. So what does this mean? For starters, the word Dharma, when translated from Sanskrit, sort of refers to something that comes from beneath to uplift or to support someone. And so, really what this means is the thing that supports you in your existence. Now, not so loosely translated, Dharma is commonly accepted as being your mission or your purpose. In French, we would say your raison d'être. It is the reason that you are. And Dharma is really the path that we take that is specifically ours and that brings us to why we are here, why we find ourselves in these bodies, in this moment in time, in the geographical location that we find ourselves in, with all the resources that are available to us. There is purpose and meaning everywhere. It is not an accident that you are here. It is not an accident that you're listening to this podcast. It's not an accident that you're being exposed to these teachings, and really none of it has been an accident. There has been a thread of continuity and a thread of meaning and a thread of purpose throughout all of it that has brought you to where you are today. So if Dharma is purpose or mission or the reason why you're here, then we're taught that it is better to live a fraction of that than to try and imitate someone else's. We're also taught that it's better to die in that than to try, or rather to die in someone else's. And so what does this mean? In a very sort of modern day practical application, what does this mean? Well, it means, for starters, that when we try and imitate someone else's anything, when we look at what someone else is doing and we think that's better than what I've got going on, so I'm going to try and do that, we immediately fall into competition. Competition is really, I believe, the path of death for the soul. As energetic beings, we thrive on collaboration. We thrive on cooperation. We thrive on accompaniment. We thrive when there are those by our side who are walking this path with us, and we thrive when we walk alongside others on their path. And listen, their path, our path, it all becomes one. It ultimately is always one. But when you consider that we live in a moment right now in time where competition is what is prioritized over collaboration or cooperation, then we realize that we are, by default, in a stage of conflict. We are placed into a context or an environment of conflict. Whether it is really communicated as being this or whether it is just insinuated as being this, competition is everywhere. We live in the age of the image. We live in the age of everything is first degree. We live in the age of social media and document everything that's amazing and pretend that the rest of it doesn't exist. Certainly don't advertise it. And so what this does inadvertently is, for those of us who are not necessarily living our best lives or not necessarily surrounded by abundance, we go on social media and we are seeing all of the abundance that everybody is advertising. Everybody is the star of their own reality show. Everybody is, documenting how, look at my breakfast. Look how beautiful my breakfast is. Look at my dinner. And look at where I am. And look at what I'm wearing. And look at who I'm with. And look at my kids. And look at my house. And look at this beautiful seascape. We get it. We understand. And we understand that in many incidences and in many contexts, people are simply advertising their appreciation for the things that are good in their lives, and that's fantastic. The shadow side of that, and there will always be a shadow side, is that for those who are not living those moments of beauty or supposed beauty, they can be left wondering what they're doing wrong. What are you doing that I'm not doing that has resulted in you having this perfect meal, perfect marriage, perfect kids, perfect life? So maybe I should be doing what you're doing. Maybe I should try and get the job that you have, or maybe I should try and imitate the way you look, or maybe I should try and get my kids to behave like your kids. And right there we fall into competition. And competition depletes our energy. We live in competitive times where it's kill or be killed. People are fighting to get ahead of each other, and very often in corporate environments, that is the status quo. That is the MO. That's what people are supposed to do. Bill more, do more, pull in more business, and do more than the person next to you. And if the person next to you can't pull in as much as you're pulling in, then they can be let go. And we'll just keep trying to up the ante until everybody burns out. Competition is where we shrivel away energetically. When we are competing against each other, there is no unity, where there is no accompaniment. There is no, let me help you if you stumble, and I would appreciate it if you would help me if I stumble. There's none of that. And so what that results in is isolation, loneliness, burnout. So the second we start to try and imitate someone else's Dharma, we fall into competition. When you consider that also in today's moment, in today's times, the people who are elevated to the collective consciousness, the people who are celebrated, the people who are on the cover of magazines, and the people who are, elected to positions of quote-unquote power, these are people who, in many cases, have gotten the most naked, who have spoken the loudest or yelled the loudest. They're the people who have said the most sensational and outrageous things. They're the people who are the most divisive. They're the bullies. They are the attention seekers. They are the people who are basically just breaking all rules of decorum and propriety in order to get attention, and they get it. And so, in an inadvertent way, we are being encouraged to celebrate these people. We are being encouraged to think that if I feel invalid or impotent in my life, all I need to do is start saying sensational things, saying divisive things, becoming a little bit of a shit disturber, get naked, really just make a spectacle of myself, and then I will somehow be more valid and be more appreciated and be more valued. And so when we see these people in positions, again, of what we assume to be power and influence in the world, we think, oh, well, I should be doing that. And we immediately discredit the fact that our own existences and our own experiences are sacred. I don't know if you could hear the wind around me, but wow. The power of Mother Nature, unbelievable. The gods are with us. When you consider, and I've said this before, but when you consider that there is only one of you in all of time, one of you in all of time, then I want you to consider just how valuable that is, just how sacred that is. When we understand that there is one of you and one of me in all of time, why would we spend any time devaluing that and trying to be anything or anyone else? This is about recognizing our own divinity, our own uniqueness, our own value, our own purpose. And listen, you may not know what your Dharma is. You may not be clear on what that path is. And the only pointers I can really give you are pay attention to what you inherently can do that someone else can't do. Pay attention to your talents and practice them and study them and hone them until you have mastered them. And then ask yourself, if I could be of service in any way, shape possible, what would I do? And how can I use my talents for that? Typically, that's what I tell people when they tell me that they're trying to find their path of Dharma. But I want you to really, really understand that for you to compare yourself to anyone else is for you to discredit your own value and worth. When you consider that most people walk around with the belief that they are not something enough, then you understand that most people are comparing themselves to other people, because we don't feel less than, we don't feel inferior unless there's something to compare ourselves against. So we may look at our parents and think, well, they've done so much more than I have, I should be doing more. Or we may look at our friends and think, they're so much better looking or thinner or taller or whatever, so I should be more of that. And then we start to starve ourselves or over-exercise, or we incorporate practices that are harmful. And spiritually speaking, when practices are harmful for the body, they are harming the energy in the body. And in the Bhagavad Gita, we are told that that is a form of hypocrisy, and it is harming, and it is not advised. When we look at the people on magazine covers and think, my body should look like that, think again. First of all, you don't know what has been digitally manipulated to make that body look that way. And number two, speak to the person who's on that magazine cover and ask them if they're enjoying life. Because typically when you speak to the people who are thin and, that ideal sort of 2 pounds over organ failure kind of weight, when you speak to them, they'll tell you they're starving and not very happy. But when you start to compare yourself to these people on the cover of magazines or to these people in the films and in television and in our collective consciousness, when you think of these people and you think that you should be more like them, consider that they never probably felt that need to compare themselves against anybody. I think it's essential that we really adopt the philosophy that athletes take, that some of the most successful and celebrated people and people who are not celebrated for the wrong reasons, I think it's necessary to look at the philosophies that they adopt. And typically, these philosophies are competition, they're competitive, but they're not competitive against anybody else. They're competitive against themselves. And I shouldn't say against themselves, I should say with themselves, because it is being in relationship with oneself. An athlete doesn't look at what the other athletes are doing and accomplishing. The athlete looks at what their own personal best has been and sees if it can be bettered. On the path towards understanding ourselves and achieving self-realization, we need to understand that with age and with experience, we learn. And success, spiritually speaking, as I've said before, is not based on what we own and what we have amassed, but it is based on what we've learned. The more we learn, the more we know. And the more we know, the more we can learn from those past versions of ourselves that didn't have that information and make the corrections, so that we better ourselves, so that our personal best keeps getting better. And it is along that path, and trust me, that is the path of Dharma, but it is along that path that we end up getting closer and closer and closer to our highest selves. This is the version of us that does good and is motivated by good and has spiritual sight and spiritual understanding. This is the version of us that is of service. It is the version of us that doesn't want to do any harm. It is the version of us that doesn't get pulled into the rising, it's already up there, but this wave of intolerance and sensationalism and divisiveness and division. It is a version of us that is part of the solution and not part of the problem. And so ultimately, when we look at someone else's Dharma and think, I should be doing that, we are completely negating the fact that we have our own unique experience that we are meant to be living out. I've said this before, but I've told people in the past that, in every one of our lives, we are going to have a lineup of people who are ready to say no to us, to stop us in our tracks, to pull us down, for whatever reason. When we start to compare ourselves against other people, what we are doing, inadvertently or advertently, is we are getting in that line of people who are waiting to tell us no, to stop us in our own evolution, who are just ready to knock us down. What we do when we compare ourselves against other people or to other people is we go to the front of that line. We say, excuse me, let me just go ahead of you. We put ourselves to the front of the line of people who are ready to stop us dead in our tracks, and we become our own worst enemy. Stop comparing yourself to anyone else. Forget about how tall they are, forget about how thin they are, forget about how much money they have, forget about how good their dinners look, forget about what their kids are doing, forget about the ring that she's wearing, forget about the watch that he's wearing, forget about their cars, forget about their trips, forget about all the beauty and the sheen and the appearance and the superficiality, because it's bullshit. It is none of your business. What they're doing is none of your business. When I watch my dog and I bring her out onto the mountain or out for a walk, she's not looking at the other dogs thinking, oh my God, that dog is so much thinner, I need to eat a little less. And she's not looking at another breed and thinking, God, I wish I were that breed. I love her fur. She's not thinking that shit. So why are we thinking that shit? It's not helpful. There are moments in this experience of being a sentient human being that we have got to stop ourselves in the thought patterns that bring us into harmful places. It is essential that we stop the process of comparison so that we are not in competition with other people and thereby diminishing and depleting our own reserves of energy. We are better together. Encourage each other. Celebrate other people's successes, understanding that that is their path, you have yours. And trust that when you celebrate other people's, they will celebrate yours when they come to be. But know yourself to be worthy enough and of value enough and important enough and good enough, whatever that means to you, so that you don't have to look at someone else and think, well, they're doing it better. Because trust me, that is a game that will never, ever, ever end. And it's a game that you will never, ever, ever win. This is where we find confidence. This is where we move away from insecurity. This is where we understand our own true worth. We start to accept ourselves. We start to honor ourselves. We start to love ourselves. And I'm referring back to a couple of podcasts ago. But all of this is essential. And it stems from this one teaching, these 2 verses. It's maybe 2 or 3 verses in the Bhagavad Gita. But it is better to live a fraction of your own Dharma, even imperfectly, than to try and imitate someone else's. So what this means is, it is better to do you, even if you fuck up, but keep doing you, than to try and do someone else, to try and be someone else, to try and live that experience and see if you can, make that happen for you. Yes, we should be inspiring each other, but we also need to have a very clear perspective on what our path is and what someone else's path is. And again, when you understand that there is never going to be another one of you, there's never going to be someone else who's going to have the same expression that you do, the same mannerisms, the same capabilities, the same way of making his or her way out into the world than you do. You start to find the value and the sacredness and the divinity of you. There is something unbelievably, indescribably beautiful about you, and it's about time that you figured it out and recognized it and celebrated it. Wear it like the finest garment. Own it like it is the greatest treasure, because that is all true. It is better to live a fraction of your own Dharma than to try and imitate someone else's. Think about it. I'll see you later. This has been the Examine Life with Bram Levinson.